June 15, 1873. Her essay, Scientia et Potentia, was about the importance of education to improve one's life. She gave a timely valedictory address to her fellow classmates. Along with this, she was active in the community, and her best friend, Anna Pierce, also a member of the New Albany community, they participated in things like the Centenary Sunday School Festival with a great table display of flowers. They also worked with the Ladies Benevolent Society on the ice cream table by serving that, and they were very active in the community. An interesting side point, and it was mentioned with Bill Smith, who could not be here. He had mentioned that he was certain that one of his relatives was Myra's classmate, but graduated in 1869. And I'm going, no, I have a diploma. It says 73. More digging. Myra had 3 diplomas. In 1869, she had a Mistress of Liberal Arts. In 1870, she had a Mistress of Liberal Arts in English Literature. And then in 1873, her degree was in music. So a little side spot that Bill prompted me by saying, no, she graduated with my grandmother, and I'm going, no, I don't think so. So it was pretty amazing that she actually had 3 degrees from DePauw University, or College for Young Women, I should say. Mama married Ira Grossman Strunk on the 11th of November, 1875. The wedding is assumed to be held at the Episcopal Church since the Sullivans were active members of the church. The Reverend Joseph S. Woods presided, and Myra's dress was made by her mother. It was a modified pagoda sleeve with a bustle, medium-length train. The lace and beadwork down the front and along the sleeve edge were done by both Myra and Jane, and it had about 50 small pearl buttons down the back. The lace that was used was still, it was kept, and it is now part of our family tradition. Ira was one of 15 children born to John C. and Nancy Henry Strunk in Jeffersonville, Center County, Pennsylvania. Ira was the 9th son and also the youngest boy of the family. Ira's father, John, worked his father's trade, which was milling, and John worked alongside his brothers in the milling business. In 1827, he married Nancy Henry, and they had a hard start in life, a bed, 2 plates, a knife and fork. That was their entire household contents. After many years working for others in the milling business, John bought a farm in Marion, Pennsylvania, just east of Jacksonville. It was there that Ira and his brothers worked as farm laborers. Ira went to school in the village for about 5 months and then went to Jacksonville Seminary, and that was where he acquired a teacher's license. He taught in the winter, and in the summer he went to what we would call continuing education. In the fall of 1868, he attended and enrolled in the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Kentucky University in Lexington. It was at the close of the first year, the soon-to-be president, James Patterson, offered Ira a tutorship in the college. But near the close of the second year, Ira had to drop out when money for tuition became very scarce. He then taught school for 2 years in Leesburg, Kentucky. And, oops, we lost it there. And this position was also acquired by James Patterson. He returned to Lexington and actually graduated from Hollingsworth and Company Business School, not Kentucky University. It was Hollingsworth that sent Ira to New Albany in September of 1872 as a principal of their branch school, the New Albany Business College. Ira then met his soon-to-be wife and worked on growing the college. He bought first half interest and then full interest from Hollingsworth and Company, and in May of 1876, a Dr. D.M. Hammond became his partner. Now, the school was very well regarded in the community and the surrounding area, and it really did prosper. Now, a curious thing about Ira, his first love was actually agriculture. He took courses in horticulture at the university. His first and early love of the growth and maintenance of orange groves started about the mid-1870s and continued even after he had sold his partnership in the school. Out in Colton, California, he had extensive orange groves, and he was active in that farming community and was also a farm board trustee. Various city directories, clubs, organizations, and such listed him as being very active. And an interesting article in the paper, Ira acquired free mail delivery for Colton, California, an unheard thing. The newly married couple, they lived in the Sullivan home on Main Street, and 2 children were born. Florence Catherine, my grandmother, in 1876, and Eva Cannon in 1879. During the following 6 or 7 years, I was very busy teaching, growing the business, and traveling for this new venture, an orange grove in DeLand, Florida. Myra was busy at home. According to my grandmother, she said that her mom was the most protective mom anyone had ever met. She was of strong character, work values, and faith. Florence really didn't mention her father very much, and she said it was she, her mother and grandmother, that were there for them as they were growing up. And that brings us to Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Newcastle at the time when Myra arrived, it was in the late 1886. Myra and her mother, Jane, and their 2 children arrived in the late year around November. And a newspaper article appeared, and it said, "Sometime on Sunday, Miss Myra Strunk and her mother, Mrs. Sullivan, secretly left for New Albany, ostensibly for Pittsburgh, taking with them Professor Strunk's 2 little girls. Professor Strunk effected an entrance on Monday morning into the house by climbing a ladder into an upper window to ascertain if the children had been secreted in the house and found the whole family gone." Newcastle at the time was a growing community with a large collection of aunts, uncles, cousins of the extended Sullivan family, and they were already well established in the area. It was there that Myra and her family settled into a house on Grant Street. Myra was a widow as far as the family and the community knew. Mom went about providing for her family. Well, Jane was really staying home and providing child care. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of evidence for financial means or support for either Myra or Jane, who was also a widow of about 8 years at the time of their arrival in Newcastle. So, Myra, being a trained pianist and a lovely singing voice, went about and taught piano to children in the neighborhood and community and provided musical entertainment for social events in the community. And this was how she provided for her family. She later took a job as a clerk in the Shenango Glass Company in the city. Mr. William S. Foltz, the president of the company, was also a cousin of the Charles C. Sullivan line of her father. During these busy working years, she raised 2 children. She was active in the community. She taught her children how to play the piano. She sewed their dresses. And they participated in the church life of Trinity Episcopal Church. As a side note, the alder-cloths, lace alder-cloths investments still in use today were made by both Myra and Jane. Really a beautiful testament to their talent. My grandmother talked of many family gatherings, picnics, days at Sandy Lake, and that was a local water resort, visiting friends and activities in the community. The girls, as young as they were, attended the city schools. They were active. They had church choir. They took dance, tambourine and drill teams, and activities provided and arranged by neighborhood families. They were often mentioned in the social happenings in the newspapers. So it was kind of fun for me to read some of this as I did research. Both Florence and Eva, upon graduating from the city's high schools, went to normal school, or our teachers' college, to become teachers. Florence sat and passed the teacher's examination in 1894, while Eva sat and passed in 1901. Florence also attended Vassar in the mid-1890s. Eva went for, an unknown period of time abroad to Italy to study. Interestingly enough, they both taught 7th grade in junior high school in the city, which were our middle schools. They both presented continuing ed courses in the yearly Teachers Institutes, and they were active socially. There were sleighing parties, gatherings at local hotel resorts, and they were active in the community clubs. Florence married Samuel DeGraff Pearson, June 1902. DeGraff was a merchant and entrepreneur in the growing city, and Eva was engaged to be married in the summer of 1905 to Edward, but unfortunately she died in February of that year. A really sad note. Eva's death was quite unexpected. She had been teaching school, got the grip on a Monday, seemed to be recovering at home, and died suddenly that Saturday around noon. Ira did not know of her death. Even in the 1910 census, some 5 years later, Ira lists himself as having 2 living children. He also lists himself as being widowed in the 1910 and 20 census, but divorced in the 1930 census when he is returned to New Albany. Myra, on the other hand, has been widowed in all records, census, and reports. In actuality, the divorce was finalized in the 1st of November 1888 by Judge Charles P. Ferguson. And that was on the grounds of abandonment. The judge was also the very same judge who presided over the local 1886 murder trial, which I thought was really interesting, keeping it all in the family. Myra was always learning new things. Her scrapbook shows how she cut out little facts and pieces of information. A lot of it had to do with music. She loved listening to and singing and listening to music until her hearing began to go. She had been an avid reader all of her life until her vision began to fail. As it dimmed, she learned to see through touch. She taught herself Braille, and she had a special white glove that she liked to use when she read her watch for time. She was active in the community, gardening clubs, church clubs, and was known as an excellent cook. Okay, that brings us to gossip, speculations, rumors. Did Myra and Charles actually have an affair, as everybody in the community thought? Before you decide, here are some things to consider. The Hoovers and the Sullivans were longtime family friends. The father, Charles, and William were both prominent businessmen and both members of the Oddfellows. They visited one another's homes. They did things socially. Charles and Myra were only a couple years apart in age and in school. They had mutual friends. They had a mutual love of music and singing, and both had really excellent singing voices. They shared this interest not only within the family, but in the community as well. Charles, as you have heard, was the choir director of the church. Myra played the organ for Sunday service and the piano for choir practice. They shared this at family gatherings, and Ira saw the Hoovers, in particular Charles, as being very welcome in the Sullivan home. When Ira was around and participated in these gatherings, he saw how Myra and Charles acted together. Myra continued to wear her wedding ring even after she left New Albany. She kept mementos like her wedding license, she kept photos, she kept her wedding dress, and she listed herself on every document as a widow. She frequently wore black, as women of her time in mourning would do. Myra was a devout woman. From a very early age, she participated with her family in the church life, both here in New Albany, and into adulthood she continued at the church in this area, as well as the Trinity Episcopal Church in Newcastle. She took her wedding vows very seriously. She never remarried. She never even associated with men. And there were a lot of interested parties in Newcastle, according to my family. She considered herself a widow, and the family, both immediate and extended, and the community, knew her as a widow. Was Myra lonely with Ira traveling for weeks at a time and working long hours? I think this is a big possibility. Remember, she was a young mother running a household of 6 adults, two of which were boarders, male boarders, a clerk and a student, most likely of Ira's schools, and raising two small children. According to my grandmother, her mother and grandmother were the role models and caregivers. Apparently, Ira was absent most of the time because of school and business and teaching, as well as the Florida venture with his orange grove. Was Charles, as a longtime friend, also a confidant, as well as a musical partner? I think this may be true also, because they were very close in age, they had grown up together, they had mutual friends, their families were mutual friends, and they had a long-standing love of music and singing. They had more in common than Ira did with Myra. When Ira was so ill and living at the Occidental Hotel after leaving the Sullivan home in December of '85, a newspaper article appeared and it said, "Professor I.G. Strunk is quite ill of inflammation of the stomach and bowels at the Occidental Hotel. Mrs. Strunk is constantly at his bedside, attending to his needs only as a wife can." Apparently, even after Ira had left the Sullivan home some 3 months earlier, she was concerned enough that she took care of him daily for several weeks. Ira's jealousy apparently started not long after their marriage. In Myra's cross complaint, she said, her husband began to treat her cruelly because of his irritable temper and excessive and baseless jealousy, that at one time she had a visitor, Miss Austin of Vincennes, and that during that visit Mr. Strunk drew a pistol upon her and threatened to shoot her unless she told him all that she knew about any misconduct of his wife. Ira had also left Myra once before in 1880 due to her mother having estranged them because of his jealous behavior. At that time, Ira left for Florida for the benefit of his health, and he stayed for over 6 weeks. And interesting about the testimony, James Shepard, who attempted during the trial to present some very damaging testimony, claimed to have seen Charles and Myra in a compromising position in the church on 2 separate occasions. He'd been sitting on his porch and saw them through the open church door. Prosecutor Frank B. Burke was able to demonstrate that this would have been impossible from Shepard's vantage point on his porch. He also mentioned that Hiram Cannon and A.C. Axline, both prominent businessmen in the community and Episcopal church members, charged that due to the structure of the building, he couldn't have seen what he claimed. There was no way. Also, they provided a statement and said it was not unusual for members of the church to enter that building when the church doors were locked and they used the window. This was a very suspicious activity of Charles, entering the church through the window. At the age of 92, Myra Sullivan Strunk died in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, in the home of her daughter and son-in-law, Florence and Samuel DeGraff Pearson. The funeral services were held in the Moody Pearson house, and she was buried in the Oak Park Cemetery alongside of her daughter, Eva. A handwritten note was placed in the family Bible, and it said, "Mother's passing Sunday, July 27, 1941, at 3:30 in the afternoon, was something she had so longed for, and I too am happy for her that her prayers are answered. Her philosophy apparently was, well, make the best of it if it can't be cured. A fine musician, when her hearing became affected, she sadly missed her music. At 82, when a retinal hemorrhage almost completely destroyed her sight, with characteristic courage, she learned to read with her fingers. Such patience, such calmness. What a shining mark for me, Florence. And guess what? Now you know the rest of the story.
Use the mic.
We'll go back to Dick Molyneux now, who will present the rest of the story in terms of new interpretations of the trial and whether or not, if it had happened today, there would have been a different verdict.
Do I need the mic? Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Need it? Okay. All right. A few things have changed, as you can imagine. The definition of insanity, which I read a little bit earlier to you, which I read to you earlier, it included a multiple of things that, or a multitude of things that don't appear anymore. Remember, it was person of unsound mind shall include idiots, persons known compass, menace, lunatics, monomaniacs, and distracted persons. Today, the definition, the defendant bears the burden of establishing the insanity defense by a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, more probably true than not, that they were insane. So in this case, Professor Strump's counsel would have had the burden to establish that, in fact, he met the definition of insanity today. And if you recall, there was if from all the evidence in the cause, there exists a reasonable doubt of the insanity of the accused at the time of the commission of the crime, he should be acquitted. So, major difference in the burden of proof. To meet this burden, the defendant must establish, number one, that he or she suffers from a mental illness and that the mental illness rendered him or her unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of his or her conduct at the time of the offense. Then, as used in this section, mental disease or defect means a severely abnormal mental condition that grossly and demonstrably impairs a person's perception, but the term does not include an abnormality manifested only by repeated, unlawful, or